talk about worship and what we've done in worship this week, particularly, and we could talk about other things too after or among while we're talking about this particular week of worship. But the way we've conceived of this session, we've offered it a few different times, is oftentimes people have wanted to know about why you did this, how you did it, sources of things, all kinds of stuff. How did you conceive of this, and what was your reason behind stuff? And we've had this session in several different years, and have had a good time doing it. We have sometimes had one after the first rehearsal or first worship time, and then another one. This time we just did one kind of after we've done all the main worship time. So that's what we're sort of doing today. And I also find when I go to events, and I'm always curious about worship, because that's what we do. As Mary Alice said in her message several times, we're always getting ready for Sunday. And I grew up on a farm, and I always equate in some ways that working in the church is a bit like the farm. That the chickens lay every single day. And it's just a constant thing, and it's every single day there are things that we need to do in order to be ready for Sunday. So it's a continual process. Just to get us going a little bit, how were these worship times this week conceived, and how did we plan them? They were all planned collaboratively. They were planned by a group of students. We called together, I asked probably, I think about 8 or 10 students to meet, and they actually met on a holiday this spring for about 3 hours one morning. And we had by that point the main themes of the sermons, and what I have asked for in recent years, both in our congregation and here, people that have preachers, if we're wanting to plan worship that's focused on a theme, I've asked for not just a scripture reading and not just a title, but a few sentences. I've usually said 3 or 4 sentences that help us know where you're going with what you're going to say. Because I oftentimes find that a title is sometimes not helpful at all. And the scripture can go many, many, many different directions by how you read it, how you perceive it. And if you can just get a little paragraph, it's very, very helpful to know where, if you want to be thematic in worship, and where that's going to go. So that's very helpful. So we pulled together a group of students and then just put those services out. The way I've planned worship for the last many years since I've worked in a more collaborative planning process, is that we put a topic or an idea out, and then we start brainstorming on that, and we think of what are some songs that might fit that. I like to think, typically, if we're looking for 4 or 5 songs, if I could find at least double that, I try to start with double what I need so that you can eliminate half and still get to a good place. I'm even more comfortable sometimes with more than that, so that you're really choosing, rather than just, this is the only thing I could find. Now, there are some topics where that's all there is, or that's all you can find, and that's a whole different story, but it's ideal to have a lot of things. Then in these services, we talked about what are some overall ways that we connect them, what are some visuals we could use, without having the ability to use an overhead, any screens or projection. This room is not set for that. And for us to put anything in that room would be like when you've been in sessions, it's put up there, it's not very nice looking, and it would make technology look bad rather than technology serve a positive purpose. So we've not been able to use technology, so we figured out, so what are some visuals, what are some other responses, and like you saw, the taking out of the luggage and different things like that we did. We've tried to figure out what are some of those kinds of things. The implementation of the services, we planned these in about the second week of April, maybe April 10th, April 12th, somewhere along in there, is when we actually did this planning process. We took lots and lots of notes, and we recorded some of our planning process, because I've learned through the years, even if you plan 2 weeks ahead, which is what we do in our church, we plan 13 days out. By the time you get through one service, I found I can only have one service in my head at one time, And then when I get 2, then I don't remember what part of which one went with which. So if I plan something now that I'm going to do with a service happening in between, I can't remember a lot of what I intended to remember. So we take a lot of notes, and then we had a very good verbatim of what we talked about, which turned out to be really important when we got into the implementation of these things in the last 6 weeks or so. What are we really going to do? How are we going to make this work? How's it going to fit? Rehearsal, these services were all rehearsed Monday night for about 2.5 hours or something like that. We intended to rehearse a bit less than that, but this team's never worked together before. These are all Baylor students, but I don't think many of these people, I've worked with most all of them, not all of them, but I've worked with a number of them in different places around the world, even when we've traveled, but not this particular team. So we were kind of finding our way in terms of how do people relate and connect, and what are the gifts and the particular skills of the group and all that sort of thing, and how do we make this all work. So the rehearsal was about 2 hours and 15 minutes or so on Monday night. I had met with the organist in advance, and we had talked through a number of things last week. And then we rehearsed each morning at 6:30 a.m. So we rehearsed this morning from 6:30 to 7:30, and yesterday from 6:30 to 7:30, which is a really, really crazy time. But the only other time would have been last night, from 9:30 to 10:30, which might have been better. I don't know. But we've done this early morning rehearsal the last few years, and it worked because then it's very fresh. We also found a few years ago that you can't rehearse something on a Monday night and then come back on Wednesday and expect anything to lodge. It's got to be a lot more immediate than that. So that's kind of the process, a little bit of the implementation, and a little bit of the rehearsal, the way that we rehearse things. So this is an open discussion of whatever you would like to talk about in terms of specific items within the services, or feedback, or things that you would question. It's really a conversation, and I will step back a little bit. John Micah is here in the room, and he was a part of this, not the planning process, but it's been a part of the rehearsal and certainly a huge part of the implementation. Brennan also wasn't in on the planning, but has been a part of all of this other part of the process. So they could give their ideas too, or how they saw the process working. But we can talk about collaboration, and we can talk about, I have this, somebody told me recently, they said, I think everything you do is communal. That you're always working with somebody to do everything. And I think that's really true. And it's not that I'm an insecure person and believe that I can't do things on my own or even do them well, but I find that I work better with other people, and I'm much more inspired when I work with other people. I have a lot of energy from working with others, and I don't have nearly as much energy working by myself. I just am put together that way. And I also, and I'll stop talking after this, I also find that if we're preparing leaders for the church, that we might as well learn to work together now as students, and we might as well model that, because it's not going to be different in the church, or we're not going to really be everything we might be, and we're not going to allow others to use their gifts in the way that they need to be allowed to use them. So a lot of the rehearsal has been very collaborative, and I think it has been, at least that's the way I perceived it in terms of our working together to figure out solutions for things. So, what did you come prepared to talk about? Yeah.
Question about your planning this week, and this happens so many times throughout the week, but for instance, one thing that comes to mind is I Must Tell Jesus. You did that, I think, yesterday, and you did so many things in that hymn that you're not going to go to lifewayworship.com and get. How does that come about in your planning?
Good question. First of all, that arrangement is from Benji Harlan. Some of you know Benji Harlan has a series of hymn-based accompaniments that are meant to be congregational enhancements in terms of anthems. And that arrangement came from some stuff that he did. I first did that I Must Tell Jesus thing probably 10 years ago in our church, in our congregation. A lot of things that we've done this week are things that I've done at church and things that I've kind of thought of. Some of the things are really original that students thought of and whatever. But I don't really know how I came about putting that together, except that it just occurred to me that I must tell Jesus and other people must, and we have this idea that we all need to speak. And if the idea was standing, and I was thinking of a testimony meeting, like, one person stands and attests to something or testifies, and another person then says, that was my experience too, and they stand in solidarity with this other person, and another person's, in solidarity. And I thought, in a sense, that's what we do on Sunday morning. We all need Jesus, and then we stand in with somebody else, and this whole idea of we're standing together. So that's where the I Must Tell Jesus idea came from. Yeah.
So it's an arrangement, somebody's arrangement with essentially your own flair a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And we adjusted the tempos and tried to increase the tempo and move it forward, and the various things we did. But the people standing was sort of something we added to it. But it is a published arrangement. If you want to, I will put together, it might take me a few weeks, but I'll put together the sources of the various things we used, and I can send you those. I'm going to let you be responsible for sending me an email. And if you'll send me an email, I'll respond to you about, sources. And several people have asked for copies of prayers and things like that, and I can get you sources or things that are available. Yeah. Some of the prayers that we did were written by Adam Cogliano. One of the students wrote a couple of the prayers. A couple of prayers were from the Worship Source Book. Some of you might have, it's a thing that the Calvin Institute for Christian Worship put out a few years ago. I believe there's an online version. Adam was telling me he researched and found a couple of those things like that. That affirmation of faith that we did today, that was adapted from the worship resource, from the source book. Worship Source Book is the name of that resource, but he adapted that a little bit. And he agreed to work on the prayers, and so he did that. The ones we used in the opening service that were used with All Will Be Well, those are actually from, I should have beefed up a little bit, the new Reformed hymnal, Lift Up Your Hearts. It's a red hymnal. It's a brand new, not brand new, but year and a half, 2 years maybe, something like that. It came out. I found that a while back, maybe a year or so ago, and we used that All Will Be Well, and we used those prayers in worship at our church. And I just thought those prayers were, they said what I wish I could have thought to say. And then we used them at church, and then they were really effective. And then we used them just exactly as they're printed for that worship on Tuesday. So those were a couple of the readings. The scripture readings that we used were mostly we just put them together and divided up the scripture. One of the students said, I don't know how to do that. And I said, well, just do it and send it to me and we'll look at it. Just kind of put it back, divide this up and make it work. And it was fine. He did it well.
Did you do that with the scripture after each I Must Tell Jesus verse? The part that the singer read, did that come from the kids?
That was one of the prayers one of the students wrote. The prayer that Larry and Kathy, that you guys read, that was a prayer that Adam Cogliano wrote. Yeah, that prayer. The one about lost or I am burdened. I am burdened. Yeah, that's what it was. It was this idea. So we came up with the lead line in our planning. I am burdened. Yeah, that was our line. I am burdened, and then different categories of how we're burdened and the weight that we're carrying. Yeah.
How did you mix with her in regard to the theme of her message and so forth? You told her what your need was, and you set the themes, or she set the themes?
what I gave Mary Alice, and what I've done every year with Alleluia, I've said the people that come to this conference are ministers. Ministers are all tired, and we're all overburdened, and we have so many people that need us, and many of us are close to burnout. And in the summertime, we come to a conference, oftentimes wanting and praying that somehow this place would offer us a spark, would reignite something in us that we need in order to do this one more time. We all want to do what we do, and we love doing what we do, but we need help. And what can we say that can bolster? And that, so the ones of you that have been Alleluia many times, that's the conversation I've had every year with the preacher person, and what you've heard is what that person has come forward with. And it's always been oftentimes similar, but not the same, not standing in the same place for the same message. But I don't know about you, but I think the two things that I can need every Sunday at this stage in my life is a recognition that life is really difficult and hard, and the affirmation that God is good for it. If I can have those two things on a Sunday, but I really need both of those. I don't need somebody to make it be easy, because I'm past that. And then to know, but to be assured that God has it, and I don't, is, that recalibration. I have this friend who says worship is all about recalibrating. Every Sunday we come to church to be reminded that we are not God, that we can't do it. We cannot do it on ourselves, and to quit trying and trust God again. And then by next Sunday, we're just back in the mess again, and we put ourselves back on the throne, and we have to be recalibrated and figure out that that's not the truth anymore, and then we're ready to go again. And that's pretty good to me for what I've begun to see Sunday as worship. Larry.
One of the things that I run into is when we do the Lord's Supper as a part of our Sunday morning worship, finding creative ways for our musicians to take part in that and not miss the elements, and yet provide an experience for the congregation, and to balance all that. I noticed that while the servers, those people who were minding the elements, were able to take to the Lord's Supper, those who were in the band were not. Did you have another time, or how do you deal with unpacking that?
Yeah, we intended to place some communion elements at the end, and we said we could take communion at the end. I don't know that we had so many things going on. I'm not sure we actually got that done. What we do at church with that is the communion servers leave communion on a rail kind of behind the organ, and people that are leading, if sometimes it's one or two people, but sometimes this could be several, then we just can go by and have communion at the end of that time. And usually in church there's something else that comes on later, then you can just kind of go by and have communion a little bit later. But that's what we've come up with that works well at church. In this setting, we didn't get it figured out. We were struggling to have 5 teams of people none of whom served communion before, or maybe 1 or 2, what to say and what to do, and to have some level of confidence. It's a little bit different. Yeah.
One thing that, and obviously you can use this every Sunday, but if you're in a situation with like a praise team, or maybe a blended service where you have access to a praise team, I found that if you have kind of more contemplative piece, that the leader can just lead just vocal and guitar for the first verse and chorus, and then, but usually if you rush the praise team to the front, they can take communion and they can get back before they need to come in.
Yeah, it just depends on who's leading and all that, but the idea, the other side of it is, the reality is, that's a good question, Larry. Most of us are, most Sundays we're in a place where we miss some details. you know, and we realized later we didn't think of that. At least that's my story.
And the struggle for me is to help those who are on the platform see the elements of worship as participatory on their part and not just a logistical exercise, making sure you're in the right key and you start at the right time and all of that.
Right.
We tend to use some technology. We'll use a video element or something that is not based on the platform to start with and then transition into live after that.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways, and it has a lot to do with how often your church celebrates communion. Whether if it's every Sunday, that's one thing. Whether it's a month or 3 months or whatever your cycle, however your cycle runs. Yeah. Yes.
I like the formatting of your bulletin, of your program. What kind of software are you using for that? Because I'm in a church where we use screens. The congregation is used to singing off the screens, but I'd like to get them back to actually looking at the music, looking at the notes, because I grew up with that, and I know that a lot of our people have gotten away from reading music, and this is a great opportunity for them to start actually putting notes with music. And so what kind of software are you using?
Yeah, these files were all originally Finale files, and then we turned them into TIFF files. You can save them as a TIFF file, which is actually like a photograph, and then the TIFF file you can put that into a Word document. This is designed in InDesign, is what this is designed in. We've gone back and forth different years, different events we've done at Baylor, and putting them in some sort of a Word document and putting them in InDesign. InDesign is a lot more, and I'm the worst person to talk to about any of this, but I'll tell you what students tell me, that InDesign is a lot better in terms of it being actually a publisher kind of format, that for people who have some sense of that it's a lot better, it works a lot better, but it takes some time to learn it, and it can be a little bit tricky. So sometimes when we've done Alleluia, we've had some student workers who this was overwhelming to them, and we put it in a Word document and then used it from there. But when we do the Word document, every time you move something, everything shifts. InDesign doesn't do that, and so we don't get this weird pagination and all those kind of things. And there are things in these, if you looked at these really carefully, like all the TIFF files were not the same size for the notes, and I picked these apart until Monday night, and then we just had to release them, and we tried to be all consistent. And then I didn't actually, it was hard to get proofs of some of these because our printers in our building wouldn't print these documents, so we had to send them somewhere else on the university campus to get them in the format they were actually going to be in, and then we had to pick them up and all this kind of stuff. And then as I went along, I'm bothered by the fact that all the notes aren't the same size heads, and and that kind of stuff bothers me. But at some point, you have to pick what's important. And there were some files that had a little bit of an indentation, and they weren't, just weren't quite straight. But we had, a student working on this who's really has some good technological skill, but had never done anything like this before. And so his knowledge of what needed to be was up and coming and moving forward. So that was a challenge. But that's the way we did the files.
It's nice to know you have those problems too.
It's the real world, and we try to get everything right. But just little things like on one place where there were 3 authors, we had them all named first name, last name. Another one we had the 3 last names. And I mean, as a scholar, those are the kind of things that format-wise, you just don't do those things. But anyway, there's only so many things you can pick apart.
Well, it's amazing you're up there. And I would have thought you had these all printed in May, and you're just sitting around waiting, and you're I mean, we don't know any of this, and it's just you just come across as so relaxed.
He told us when he gets a little embarrassed or TXT comes
Well, I would love to have had it in May, but I'm also a person that I could never have just done these in May and put them away. Because I would have had to pour over them all summer long. And I can't release things early because I'll proof it one more time and keep on. And the truth is, you keep finding things, when you keep proofing things. But that's just my perfectionistic self, and I just am that way. And we have to release things, but I also think I guess this is defensive of people like me, but I think we also have to keep on working at it to get it as good as we can. And then we have to say that's good enough and learn to release that and learn to be okay with it. But I think if we don't work at it to get it the very best we can, whatever it is, then we can become a hindrance to people for whom detail means hindrance or engagement. Is that true for you all? Because I don't want things. It doesn't have to be, but I want to still work hard at it, and for me at least, that is a huge part of where I give, is this idea of working hard to get it to the best level that we can get it to. That's important.
The crafting of materials like this to aid in worship is in itself, it's an opportunity to serve in worship.
That's right.
And to pursue it with the same kind of excellence that you pursue that hour or hour and a half on a Sunday morning.
So, for instance, and I say this in our church a lot, to me, to offer something that is the best we could do, to give that to you, this also is an offering of worship, at least the way I imagine it. And if I were on the receiving side of that, which since I am, it matters to my worship. And it's a gift that I have great appreciation for. So, these are the kind of things that can drive you crazy if you let them go too far. But to know where the lines are there. And, yeah.
Because, it really is a part of service, because I have everyone I've forgotten from Alleluia, I have it. And it's just marvelous to me how you do that, and so every time we use something, passes on the gift, so it really is.
And in our churches, when we think nobody cares about these things, start doing it poorly. Or have your successor come along and do it poorly, and then go back, and you will realize that people really cared about that sense of detail, and that it really, really mattered to a lot of people, and they were able to worship much more effectively that way.
So which copyright licenses do you use? Do you have all of them to be able to cover all this music?
We do have several, and that's a great question, and one I should be more prepared. But we do have one license and CCLI. Those are the two that I can think of right off.
Because it seems that you're particularly interested in using some diverse hymn texts to a variety of tunes that are maybe more well established. And one license, I know, is a decent resource.
Yeah, and they cover a lot that others don't cover, and I wish that they would all just use the same license, and then it would be a whole lot easier. But it's a business thing, and so different people are trying to cover different elements, different sources.
The more contemporary songs are in Song Select, which is part of CCLI, and it will print out the line of the melody.
Yeah. And we did use Song Select on charts, and then again, I didn't do all this. Students did, other people did some of it, but we did print the scores for the singers were SATB scores. We didn't end up using parts on some things of the contemporary songs. And on a Sunday morning at our church, we have 4 singers typically, usually a quartet, and I give them the parts because we don't always use the parts, but it helps us have something to work from. And sometimes even the parts can be a really good resource to give an instrumentalist, because if you give them the choral part, the 4 part, that gives them a lot to work from in addition just to a chord chart, because a lot of instrumentalists could play something from those 4 parts that can't figure out a chord chart, and certainly couldn't improvise from a chord chart, but they could play a tenor part on this line and hit an alto part somewhere, or or you can transpose that stuff, and we do a lot of that at church, getting into different instrumentals. Other observations or questions?
I thought it was wonderful you were so sensitive to the key. We have, I noticed in one of the lines said we have to cope with an accompanist who, or maybe they used organists. I felt bad for, kind of against organists, but it was like they want to control the speed and everything else. So mine wants to go really fast. And that's very different. And usually it kind of becomes a dirge. But no, not him. You have to really work to stay up with him. It drives me insane sometimes. But he is in charge of that sometimes. And it's just really difficult to know how, to get the point across to him and to have it. And he's now playing with the praise band, so am I. And improvising is not his thing. So it would help him so much to be able to see a part of the praise band music that had more options.
Well, tempo is a big thing, and I hope we got tempos right. I think we did pretty much what we intended to do. But even this morning, we had a pretty good discussion about one of the pieces and what the tempo was, and we tried to get a metronome marking about where we were and then about where we were headed, and trying to gauge that. But I mentioned in this other session that I'm doing on congregational song that metronome markings really can shift from rehearsal to worship. And that's something when you're working with pretty regimented musicians, they want you to give them a number and then they want to stick with it and they want that to be right. But I've been in many times where I've gotten in worship and just it didn't feel right. It didn't work right, and the people weren't singing this way, and I knew that by the time we get to this wasn't going to work, and we shift gears. So I try to leave the opportunity for that. And the difference in a full room and an empty room in terms of acoustics and the feel of the group and all kinds of things are can be very, very different. And you've got to have that ability to be flexible. But I think in terms of tempo, rehearsal is the absolute most important thing with tempo. It is the most important thing. And you can't expect someone to play a tempo that you have in your head when you have not told them what that tempo is. So many times through the years, students have complained about the accompanists in their churches, and they're just, oh my gosh. And then my question is always, well, how often are you rehearsing? And usually it's, we're not. And, well, how would you expect for someone to know that? This particular week, I trusted John Micah to set some tempos. I trusted the oboe player set a tempo or two, organist set some tempos, and we just altered them maybe ever so slightly. But if someone can't set a tempo that you think is pretty close, then I would suggest that you not allow them to set the tempo, because then you kind of insult them when you bring people in and change the tempo too dramatically. Because if I set the tempo and then you change it, I feel bad that I didn't get it right. And so I would rather you give me a tempo than expect me to find one if I can't. But we had practiced enough, and some really innate musicians. Like today, we intended to start the King's Fold tune, the da-da-dum-bum. We intended to start that a little differently and then build it, and I think yesterday was one that we moved ahead. We did try to move tempos ahead yesterday on His Eyes on the Sparrow. We moved that quite a lot from the beginning to the end. And we talked about how to make that happen without my drawing attention to the fact that we were, because if I start conducting, then, and especially certain kinds of conducting and certain kinds of body language, you all know that the tempo isn't what we intended. So we tried to rehearse it, and then we tried to have some checkpoints along the way where this is a point where we check, this is a point where we check. And then John Micah and the drummer were working together to keep moving. And then we had some signals that if I didn't think it was quite right, then what my signal was going to be so, for us to move on. Yeah. But that's the gift in working with really good people. But most of the time the people in our church are able to do a lot more than we think. if we give them something to work with. And then the more you work with the same people, the more, oh my goodness, eventually there's such a great collaboration that's amazing. Yeah, Jim.
I can't help but think whenever we go to something that's brand new to us and everything, how we join right in and we're able to accomplish it within just a couple of bars notice. And I just think back to my church, I don't think I could do this in my church. So, new stuff has to be guarded and measured, but something within their reach, otherwise it can kill it. That's it.
And you prorate that out over a long period of time in your church. The new things we've done, and maybe for some of some people or whatever, in 3 days that might be a year's worth of work in our church. I do this project I teach a children's music ministry course at Baylor, and one of their projects is they have to teach Brendan did that this spring. They have to teach a 15-minute lesson that's from a 4-week unit that they have to write a full 4 weeks of material, and then they have to teach a unit out of that. And I tell them that you can do with your colleagues what you do in 15 minutes will probably be about what you would have accomplished in that month, because you'll sing it one time and your friends will catch it. The children will have to have a lot of repetition. And in churches like that, you introduce things way slower. There was a question. Who was?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the worship this week. I know that you serve in church as well. Is what you have done this week in worship similar, or what you do at Calvary when you lead worship? And if so, do you do a collaborative planning, and who plans that with you? And then the other question I would ask, and we all know that this is a shifting time. Some churches have choirs, some churches don't have choirs. The room that we're in does not lend itself to having a choir, and you have a choir in the congregation, so you have that.
Right.
But is there a place for a choir in this type of worship planning? How would you utilize a choir, or do you utilize a choir at Calvary?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is very typical of what we do at church on Sunday at our congregation. And we sing, I don't think we sang anything this week that we haven't sung at our church. Maybe something, but I don't know. Pretty much we do a lot of things, a lot of different things. And we're fortunate to have a congregation that it's just odd that they'll just jump in. And they're kind of ready to do, I don't know how we created that culture. I don't know how we created it. And I was a part of creating it, but somehow we created a culture of people that were willing to sort of take risks and do new things, and it's quite good. It's very, this is not, like the show of what we do, and then I would do very different. It might be, we will introduce not a new song, we try to have no more than one new thing any week ever, for sure. And then we try to be more intentional about repeating what we do. We're trying these days to repeat something at least within 6 weeks, if not a month, of every time we do something new, so that we get it back out there, and then trying to repeat things so that we have some things that stay in the congregational repertoire. Now, the choir in our church, we have a choir that sings. There's 2 Sundays a year. We don't sing the Sunday after Christmas, and that's it. I think we sing every single Sunday, even in the summertime. Our church is a very weird church too, because we came up with something.
They're all weird.
They're all weird. But when I first went there in 2001, the church had decided that they wanted to do worship differently, and that they had only been very traditional, meaning only hymns with piano organ, very typical. Baptist and evangelical free church worship, and they wanted to do something different. And I went in as an interim the week after they had made this church-wide decision they wanted to imagine worship differently. And I went there partly because I was 41 years old. I'd never led a praise song with a band, and I'd never done any of that ever. I had led a couple of praise songs from piano, and that was it. I mean, I'd done nothing, and I was resistant and even not kind sometimes, maybe. Some people helped me to see that. Larry Dank's one of those people. Just a lot of great conversations we had when we both lived in Kansas City, and great people who helped me. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But one of the things that we did that summer was we started using an ensemble of people to lead rather than just one person leading. And we started using 4 people, kind of a quartet. And what I found was none of these people knew anything new either. We were all learning it together, which took down the temperature of it. But what we figured out was during the summer, we were low attendance in a college town. We were worshiping in the chapel. And so we had some of our best singers, sometimes 5 or 6 up front, helping to lead. We're all leading collaboratively. Well, our choir in the summer would just come stand around up front in a semicircle and lead. Well, then the question became, and they didn't wear robes because it was summertime. Well, we went back in the fall, we now have this new evolving worship style. So people started saying, so what are we going to do in the fall what are we going to do about the choir robes and the choir loft? And if 4, 5, 6, even 8, our best singers are out front and we only have 25, and what are we going to do? And they won't have robes, and that's going to be really awkward, and how are we going to make this work? And it's different if you had a really big church, and had a whole lot of people. I said, I had read some article years ago about why we should not have choirs that sing toward the congregation. And that if we were really thinking of congregational singing, we would place our best singers strategically among the congregation to reinforce congregational singing. And I have no idea where I read that, and I've actually looked for it. But I didn't actually think of it on my own. And I decided, why don't we just keep having the choir come up from the congregation? And we said, we'll try it for a few weeks. And we had one woman that quit the choir because wearing a robe was important, and her family had helped buy the robes, and it mattered a lot to her. And I said, I understand. I don't really like this either. It's an experiment. So we tried it through Christmas, and after Christmas, nobody ever questioned it. So suddenly we had families that had small children, they could sit with their children and come up just for a 4-minute anthem. And we had people with guests in town that didn't feel like they had to sit out in choir and all of that. And so that went on. What we did was just kind of stand around the front, we kind of said sopranos over here and kind of gauged some space and started doing that. And it just became the way we did it. So then we started building in like a little musical transition. Usually we extend the beginning of the anthem. The choir knows where they're coming up, and then sometimes we will have, a musical transition for people to come down and extend something, or an instrumentalist come in some way. We just have a way that the choir comes up. So that became the way we did it. So when we redid our worship space about 10 or 12 years ago, we took the choir loft out altogether. Because we had not used it for all these years other than just kind of staging the band. And we just took it out, and then we cleared everything else. So we have a completely flat space, and the organ and piano are both movable on the platform, and then we have intended to get some movable platforms where we could actually have some heights, but we haven't ever been able to afford them. So we just used the flat space, and then we created more steps where the choir has more possibilities of being placed. And it just became, but we have a good choir. We have, at Christmas we'll sing 45 folks or so. On a given Sunday this summer, we've had 25 or 30 probably every Sunday. But it's a pickup group, and it's an intergenerational choir, 7th grade through, our oldest member is well into 80. So it's been, again, a good thing.
Do you do the anthems and everything?
We do an anthem, yeah. A traditional, a for real anthem every Sunday. Last Sunday we sang the Cindy Berries at the Name of Jesus. That's one on our summer repeat list. But we sing, substantive stuff every Sunday.
Does that generally fall at the same time in the service?
No, it doesn't. It shifts
Okay.
around. It might be a call to worship. Last week it was an offertory. It might be before the sermon. It can be anywhere according to whatever the function of this piece would be, how it might function within a service.
Do you decide that?
The other question was worship planning. We do collaborative worship planning, and at this point it's our pianist, who's the young woman who played yesterday for the student recital, Sarah. We have an organist who's a guy who works in the theater department here, and he's in our worship planning, our pastor, our children's minister, and so there are 5 of us that have been
And this you do
planning.
2 weeks out, because you said you do 2 weeks.
We plan on a Monday morning for, not this coming Sunday, but the next one. So we're 13 days out always. We're always at least 13 days out. This fall we're gonna experiment. What we do in the summer is in May we have an all-day planning and we map out the whole summer. Because a lot of us are out and about a lot in the summer. And we've done that this summer. What we're gonna experiment with this fall is kind of a hybrid thing where in a staff retreat, we're gonna map out a bunch of stuff with our full staff, which we've never done before, major themes and stuff. And then in January, we're gonna go to trying to do a planning about 4 months out, all in one big, huge day. And then we're gonna meet then once a month to check up on the next 4 weeks. Because we're trying to use our energy better, but what we figured out is, we don't know if we figured this out or not, but we're experimenting this fall with this idea that when you're planning, like if you maybe have 4 services in a series, that if you do them one a week, one this week, one the next week, you lose momentum. And if you're planning something that's connected, you might actually plan a lot better if you plan the whole series while you're brainstorming. And then you can think of themes that threads that run through the whole thing. And so that's something that I've been thinking a whole lot about. And then the fact that we have a new pastor is a good time to rethink some of that. And our new pastor, who's Mary Alice that you heard preach, she very much loves worship and thinks a lot about these things. And so it'll be, we're just experimenting something, something that works really well, but is there a better way? Is there a more effective way? And I've said we either need to do better planning because of this, and we need to save time for everybody that's planning. Because, the time factor is huge for.
You kind of answered my question, whether you go by the lectionary or do you do series that are separate?
Depends on the pastor.
And we kind of do both.
Okay.
Like during Lent, we will certainly do a whole Lenten theme, and we'll do a whole Advent series. So some of the bigger times of the year, usually we'll do something that lasts through Pentecost, and a pretty strong focus, and then it'll be different kind of series and things like that. So it's kind of, our church is kind of both. We did have an interim pastor who was stuck with the lectionary all year, and that also was good, but different. Yeah.
Do you do multiple services on a Sunday morning, or do you do a single service? And
Only
if so, then, so you just do one?
Yeah, we're not a very big church.
Okay.
We just do one service. Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about separating. That's what I love about through this worship. So many are in the Methodist world. A lot of churches have gone through in the last maybe 3 or 4 years of having to add worship songs. Well, they cause a lot of. So now you really do use. I want to say anybody too.
We do in our church, like we've done here. We have an organist who's very, very good. And then we have a pianist that can handle stuff, and then we have a band that, it's all a pickup group. All the band people are pickup, and nobody's paid, and so different levels of players, and good, really, 2 years ago we had 4 drummers that were rotating once a month, and they were all really good. And right now we have a guy who can play a little bit. So we're just in a rebuilding mode, and we're different kind of things. We're going to be having a new pianist and just different stuff. So it's all real world, it's a reality of things.
What's been interesting about this blended style is I haven't seen so much sharp contrast musically, and the use of layers and texture has felt more, especially yesterday's service, very Taizé-like to me, in the way things layer in and out and make it pretty seamless.
Yeah.
It's different in that way.
I think some of that might be the instrumentation that we've had this week. And again, what we've said is, who are the students that are working in the conference, and what do we have? What pieces do we have? We've never had an oboist at Alleluia before.
But boy, can he play.
He's one of us.
Yeah,
Wasn't
we've
he also
never-
playing violin the other night?
Exactly. He was the first violin in the orchestra on Tuesday night also.
And he's not even a music major.
That's right. He's now a secondary, has a secondary degree.
okay.
Yeah, but his first major is electrical engineering, or mechanical engineering. He also has perfect pitch, and
Did he know he was emulating a lead guitar line on God is Able today?
yeah, it was, yeah. But I said, well, who wants to play this? And he said, oh, I'll play that. So I thought, well, that would be really cool to put a good guitar line on an oboe. And I just find a lot of joy in that, you know. That just makes me smile, you know, to be able to do that. Interesting, because Wolfgang's a great guy. He went on the Kenya trip with the men's choir, the Vader men's choir. We just took 75 guys to Kenya in the end of May, and he was our pitch person. It's just an interesting little thing. I've had more perfect pitch people in the last 5 years than I had in the 25 years of teaching before that. So there's something about this. I think there's something about students having heard so much music and being such an oral culture. But last year, 115, 16 guys in men's choir. Brendan, what do you have, about 4 perfect pitch people, I think, in the spring semester?
I don't know about men's choir. I know like half of acapella has perfect pitch, or something crazy like that.
There's several. So it's not as rare as it used to be. I mean, I knew one guy undergrad, you know, yeah. But it's interesting. Yeah.
I loved how you started with that. You know, I did not think I expected, because we haven't really gotten to hear you just sing, you know, and it was very fun to follow that. No music, just you. All of things, like you said, all the different textures and things, the way you did it is just.
We were sort of the idea, and we've done this at church a few times. Idea of music being a gathering thing, you know, and it's like singing serving as a prelude, really. And that's very much other culture thing. You know, if you go to Africa, particularly, you know, people just start singing, and as they gather, they're singing, and it grows and builds, and you know, it's this big crescendo, and other people lead out with singing. And so that was the idea, that using a gathering song today as an opening. Yeah, Brendan.
I think and it's not something I came from a very contemporary background, and since like studying with Dr. Bradley, you know, like y'all said, like using the oboe in worship, and you know, now having my own congregation to lead, you know, and looking at what I have in the congregation, you know, most people would look at it and say, you know, well, you know, clarinet doesn't go in a praise band, and yet every time I put the high school all-stater clarinet player that's in my congregation, and I put him up on, you know, up with the praise team, people eat it up. They really enjoy, and it really enhances worship, and people sing out. And especially like the younger people, you know, because I have a young trumpet player that's very good too, and you know, arrange things for her to play with the praise band, and you know, people love it.
Yeah. I don't think it is necessarily the age thing, though, because we have this 70-something-year-old guy in our church that plays saxophone, and people just love when he plays and plays along with our group. So we've gotten in a rotation of, we have a saxophone player that plays one week, we have a high school trumpet player that plays a week, we have a Bader oboe student that in the school year plays a week, and then maybe there's another person depending on kind of who's in our congregation at a given time. But we're trying to use the people. We have one of the Bader trumpet teachers is in our church, and he will play on a rotation with everybody else. And then a lot of times he will play with the high school trumpet player, which is a great thing. And then we have a woman in our church who's in her mid-70s who plays trumpet. And she plays on a rotation also. And so we get the trumpets in different combinations, and and they don't all play. I mean, with the trumpet player from here can, just do all kinds of amazing things. And, it's just amazing the stuff that he can put together. And, I can, like Sunday, I forgot what we did. He was playing, and we turned it into this really great jazz moment. I can't remember what it was, but it was really great. Something we did really cool. I could not tell you what it was. It was really good. But one player can loop something into a different thing. But that's where when I actually sit down like on Saturday afternoon, almost usually every week, and map out exactly. We have everybody with parts for every different multiple options, and then I map out how we're going to actually put it together, how we're going to make it work, and then I'll just see, well, who we have and how can we figure this out. And like the thing today that we did with the Kingsville tune, at first I had a question whether we want to do this with organ, because that's a big organ piece, and then I just thought, no, let's not do that. We've got other players, and we already had two things where the organ was prominent, and then I thought, well, let's do something else with this. So that tune wasn't meant to be a tune with all kinds of fast harmonic rhythm. It was probably meant to have a drone. It was meant to be a lot. It's a British tune. I don't know. It's Celtic. I don't remember, but it's first in the hymnal. In English hymnal 1906 was the source of that tune. So it was collected by Vaughan Williams, and so he didn't collect it with organ. It wasn't brought from the people with that. So how do we so we decided to kind of give it a little Celtic flavor and bend the notes a little bit, and so we just used a pedal the whole time, and everything just had that E pedal and simplifying. And then if you notice, we added some tension as we moved up because of the idea of the pain and increasing and all of that. And what we did is I had asked John Micah and Benji, the organist, to, I think it said add seconds and fourths the first time, or seconds the first time, and then add some fourths, and then you can go ahead and add a third, and actually you could play full 5 tones, just to add tension on the last time. And so we just built some tension into it like that. But I just sat down at the piano and just fiddled around with it a little bit and tried to say, so what can you do with this tune? I would encourage you, when you're thinking about being creative with congregational singing, if you will play the melody and you will ignore the harmony, your creativity will start to really go somewhere. Because I think harmony is the biggest inhibitor for creativity, because we have this sense that everything creative is about cool harmonies. And it can be that, but what about melody? You see, and then when we use da 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 da, My Shepherd Will Supply My Need, that tune the other day, that's a pentatonic tune. And so that's why we were able to use just pentatonic bells. So we used do, re, mi, so, la. But we started out with just do, so, and then we added re, la, and then we didn't bring the third in, which gave it a little bit more gave it the major. We didn't bring that in until the third time, the last stanza, because we wanted a little more of the tension and then to kind of relax it. And the bells never did play very confidently like they did in rehearsal. It's one of those times that you just like the screen. I said play confidently. There's 200 singers here, but you're in worship, and they were just being really delicate, and they just kept being delicate.
I mean, there were only one or two of them that had even picked up a bell before.
Yeah, they've never really done bells, but that's no excuse for not doing what you said you were going to do. But I'll tell you a little experiment that I did one time that I learned a lot from. this has been many years ago for the younger ones of you in the room. But when the Baptist Hymnal 1991 first came out, this was when it first came out, but this was about 1996 or something. We had Sunday night church in our congregation every week, and I was really bored by Sunday night church at that stage in my life. And what are we going to do? And are we going to be creative? And I just gave myself an assignment that every Sunday night for a year, I was going to do something unique with a hymn. I was going to take some hymn and do something with it different. And so I stuck to my plan, and so for 52 weeks I came up with 52 different hymn things. And I mostly using pentatonic hymns, mostly using things I had used from my Orphan Kodai training, which I have Orph certification and Kodai certification from a long, long time ago in another life. And learned a lot and took some of that stuff. I came up with some ideas where, like, instead of using Orph instruments, which we didn't have in our church, I would use a quartet of people and assign them Orph parts, ostinato parts. And so we would do vocal ostinatos to accompany the congregation singing.
That's nice.
Wow. And that's what other people do, but I just gave them, you sing, these people sing the drum, these people have ostinato parts, and then the congregation sings, and then we just have this, just lots of ideas I came up with. What hymns can you do with just do-so harmony? Do, so. So for instance, a hymn like, on Jordan's stormy banks I stand. Sing that, ready, and go. On Jordan's stormy. And so when you sing go, ready, and go. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. I am bound for the promised land. I'm bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. Just things like that, that I just played around with, and so I would get like my wife to sing a part and see if it worked, or something like that. But putting yourself on a creativity plan where you make yourself figure out some things is a good way to come up with some stuff. Brendan.
If you weren't here was it last? When was John Bell? Was that last year?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. Those worship settings would be on the Alleluia website, right?
So.
And a lot of that stuff was so amazing how he used each kind of section of the congregation as its own voice. So.
But anyway, that was a fun little experiment that I did one time. Yeah. Okay, I think.